All right. Human genetics. So we've talked about genetics already. We've kind of started that. But now we're going to look at genetics and genetic disorders that are specific to humans. So we're going to be looking at sex-linked traits. We're going to be looking at some of these genetic disorders. And I don't know if I get to that part. All right. So somatic chromosomes are any chromosome which are not your sex chromosome. So what are your sex chromosomes? Do you remember those? The X and the Y. The chromosomes that tell your body if you're a boy or a girl and make you physically a boy or a girl. So the somatic chromosomes are any chromosomes outside of that. So how many sets of chromosomes do humans have? 46. Okay, so there's 2 sex chromosomes. So all the rest of them are the somatic chromosomes. The sex chromosomes are chromosomes that differ in males and females, like we've talked about, of the same species. So our sex chromosomes will be different than dog sex chromosomes, which will be different than chicken sex chromosomes. A combination of sex chromosomes determines the sex of the offspring. Most mammal sex chromosomes consist of a matching homologous, remember homologous means the same, chromosome in females, the XX, and a partially matching pairs in males, the XY. Remember in that crash course video, he talked about how the Y chromosome was just really short and stunted. It's not actually a Y, it's just short. So it's sort of the same as the X, it's just kind of shorter. The legs are shorter. The X chromosome is the largest of the 2, and the Y chromosome is a smaller chromosome, like I said. During meiosis, the 2 sex chromosomes are separated into 4 daughter cells. In fertilization, if fertilization occurs, the embryo will receive an X chromosome from the mother and either an X or Y chromosome from the father. The chromosome from the father will determine the sex of the offspring, depending on which chromosome is passed down. Okay, so remember during meiosis, those chromosomes split in half. Okay, then they split in half again. So you'll get either an X or a Y. Come grab some notes, please, Taylor. And it'll move from there. Take one to wait, please. Okay, so sex-linked traits. Autosomal inheritance is an inheritance of the alleles located on autosomal or the somatic chromosomes, the non-sex chromosomes. Both males and females are affected equally. So if you have a genetic disorder that is not a sex-linked disorder, okay, it's possible for any of your offspring to have that disorder. Okay? In sex-linked traits, sex-linked describes an allele that is found on one of the sex chromosomes, the X or Y, and when passed to the offspring is expressed. Okay, so if it's an X-linked inheritance, only boys will have it, right? Because girls don't have X chromosomes. If it's a Y, if it's an X-linked, then anyone could have it. So, like I said, X-linked, the phenotypic expression of alleles that is found on X chromosomes. So that's just saying that the allele in question is on the X chromosome and can be affected differently. And then Y-linked, phenotypic expression of the alleles is found on the Y chromosome. So the allele, the gene in question, is on the Y chromosome and is passed from father to son. Okay, now because we're talking about genes, oh, I went too far, never mind. So if a male inherits an X chromosome with a sex-linked trait from a mother who carries the recessive allele, he will express the disorder because the chromosome cannot affect that allele. Okay, so basically what that is saying is if the mother is carrying the trait, even if it's recessive, it will be expressed. Okay, because there's no other trait on the Y chromosome that he gets from his dad to dominate over that recessive trait. Okay, males cannot inherit an X-linked disorder from his father, since the father passes on a Y chromosome to his son. Okay, so the best example, I've talked about color blindness, and the example that we look at next is color blindness. So color blindness is an X-linked recessive allele. So a father who is colorblind will never pass his color blindness onto his son, because his son gets his Y chromosome, and the allele for color blindness is on the X chromosome. A colorblind man will only pass on that X-linked chromosome to his daughter. Okay, so his daughter is now carrying that X.
Students come to the office: Shailene McKenzie, Josie Head, Tasha Constant, Evert Badger, Shane Thomas. Shailene, Josie, Tasha, Evert, and Shane come to the office.
Okay, so only the boys will get that. Now that his daughter has the X-linked chromosome and then another X that doesn't have the trait on it. So it's a possibility for her to now pass on that X with the sex-linked trait on it to her son. It's a 50-50 chance, right? She's either going to pass on the trait, the X chromosome that does have the recessive allele on it, or the one that doesn't. She can also pass on the trait to her daughters, but they won't express it, right? Because it's recessive. So the other X from their dad will dominate over that recessive allele. Females must inherit 2 copies of a recessive gene, one on each X, in order to have the disorder expressed. So for a female to be colorblind, her father has to be colorblind, and her mother has to carry the colorblind trait. So her grandfather also has to be colorblind. Okay, that's the only way a female will be colorblind. And then Y-linked disorders also exist and are passed from father to son. Okay, a girl will never have a Y-linked disorder because she will never have a Y chromosome. Okay, so only fathers and sons will have those Y-linked disorders. Okay, questions on those? Okay. All right, so we talked a little bit about color blindness. Now, Punnett squares again. So, a woman who carried an allele for color blindness has a child with a man who is colorblind. What are the possible genotypes and phenotypes of their offspring? So, the way we note these alleles, okay, so they're X and X, so this is mom, right, X and X, but we're going to put a little B on one of her X's because she's carrying that allele. Okay, and then dad is an XY, and dad is colorblind, right? So he also is carrying that color blindness allele. Okay, so now we're just going to do, okay, our normal Punnett square. Okay. Okay, so just your regular Punnett squares. The only thing that you need to remember is that it's sex-linked. So we're looking at the sex chromosomes. So your letters are going to be X and Y. And then the allele that you're looking at is going to be a superscript. Okay, so what are my genotypes? XB, XB. Okay, and what's my ratio for that? 1 out of 4, yeah. Okay. It's another one. Mm-hmm. And that's a 1 out of 4. Okay, someone other than Whitney? XBY. And what's the ratio there? Yeah, 1 out of 4. Okay, and what's the last one?
XY.
You can't answer any more for this question, Whitney. And what's the ratio? 1 out of 4. All right, Taylor, you're out too. All right. XB, XB, what's that phenotype? Colorblind, boy or girl? Girl. Colorblind girl. Yep. Okay. XBX, what's that phenotype?
A girl.
A girl. Yeah, a girl carrying girl. Okay, Jude's out. Okay, XBY. What's that phenotype? Okay, is it a boy or a girl? Start there.
It's a boy.
It's a boy. Okay. Is he colorblind? He's colorblind, yeah. Because he doesn't have the other X chromosome to dominate over that recessive allele.
How do you know it's a boy?
How do I know it's a boy? Because it has a Y chromosome. Boys have Y. Boys are XY. Girls are XX. Okay?
Okay. He goes out.
Okay, so then XY,
Just a boy.
just a boy. Plain old boy. No color blindness, not carrying anything. Totally normal. So, the moral of this story is, if your dad was colorblind, don't marry someone who's colorblind. Our love is not strong enough to overcome the color blindness. Okay, I was going to give you an assignment on human genetics, but we don't have time. So I'm just going to go through the next 4 slides, and we're going to talk about those 4 genetic disorders. And then you're going to have to know something about these genetic disorders, because I'm assuming they're going to be on the exam. Quit playing with water.
We didn't actually let any water out. So we're playing with air.
Okay, hemophilia. Sounds weird. But basically, hemophilia is a disorder of the blood. So blood doesn't clot. Hemophiliacs are at risk of dying from falling on the ground, from scraping their knee. Bleeding out and dying from scraping their knee on the ground because their blood will not clot. Okay, they're also at risk of internal hemorrhage, really like bad internal hemorrhage. So that's bleeding on your insides because, again, their blood won't clot. And really the only clue that you're bleeding on the inside, if you're not trained in knowing what happens when you bleed on the inside, is pain, right? Because your blood's leaking out of your organs and creating pressure. So, hemophilia is carried on the X chromosome and is called an X-linked genetic disorder.
So only for girls?
So it's actually only for boys. It's kind of the same idea. If you don't have hemophilia now, you're never going to have hemophilia. Promise.
How do you get it?
You- It gets passed on. You have it from birth. So it's like,
It's so weird how
Yeah.
So what's hemophilia?
Okay, so your blood won't clot. So if you cut your hand, you will bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed until you can go to the hospital. And I believe there's something they can put on your hand or give you to help you clot.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's very, very dangerous. It's exceedingly dangerous. So it's linked, a sex-linked disorder like color blindness. Okay, so it's the same idea. If dad has hemophilia, his daughters will carry it. Okay, but his sons should be okay. Are you okay?
Yeah, it's weird. Why is it cold?
Because it, or did you get a blue one?
Yeah.
Because it has like Vicks or something on it.
Oh, weird. It's like
I thought you were like bleeding or something and holding it on your face. I was like, what's going on? Okay, so a woman who is a carrier for hemophilia has a genetic mutation on one of her X chromosomes. She will have another non-mutated X chromosome that is usually somewhat compensated for the deficit. So it usually compensates for the deficit of the other one. So she may be slightly hemophiliac, a slight hemophiliac, but won't be to the extent that her sons may be. So a man who has hemophilia has a genetic mutation only on his X chromosome. He does not have another X chromosome to compensate for the deficit, so he will have hemophilia. 2/3 of cases of hemophilia are inherited. 1/3 occur with no family history and are called spontaneous genetic mutations. So when meiosis happened in their mom and dad's gonads, something happened, something mutated wrong, and that hemophilia gene was passed on. Okay? So the females will become the carriers and males will be affected. A female could be affected just like a female can be affected by color blindness, right? If her dad is a hemophiliac and if her grandpa is a hemophiliac. Okay? All right, sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is another serious disorder. It causes your red blood cells to be misshapen. Okay? And sickle cell anemia is typically known as a disease for African Americans or African people. And it's actually a mutation that has occurred to help them deal with malaria, I believe. So the blood cells that are broken are carrying the malaria. Okay? When they go through the liver sees those broken blood cells, those misshapen blood cells, and it destroys them, which also destroys the malaria. So if you have malaria, sickle cell anemia is fantastic. If you don't have malaria, it can be really painful. So what happens is when those misshapen blood cells travel through the capillaries. So the little tiny blood vessels, like in your fingers and your toes, your skin, that can only fit one blood cell, single file, down it. Those misshapen blood cells get caught, right? Because they're not shaped in a nice little round blot. I think they're usually kind of C-shaped. So a normal red blood cell is kind of roundish, and then it actually kind of looks like a donut. And then a sickle cell blood cell is it's sickled, right? It's rounded. So those get caught in the capillaries and cause infections, damage to organs, anemia because your liver is constantly destroying those bad blood cells and there's not enough. Your marrows can't produce enough quickly enough. So sickle cell anemia is an autosomal recessive disorder. Okay, what does autosomal mean? Do you remember?
What?
Bueller. You're too young.
Both, I think,
Autosomal.
both parents have that?
No, not quite. So autosomal are chromosomes that aren't your sex chromosomes.
Where are you doing that?
Probably either at the beginning of this lesson or at the beginning of the lesson on genetics. Or in the lesson on genetics. Okay, so it's recessive, which means that both people in the couple have to be carrying the gene. Yeah, so they only will pass on that gene if they either are both carrying it, or if one has sickle cell and the other is carrying, or if they both have sickle cell. When both partners are carriers of sickle cell, there's a 25% chance of their child having the disease. So if you think about it, if they're carriers, their genes are going to look like that, right? Okay, so that's where that 25% comes from, right? These two are carriers. This kid's fine. All three of these don't have sickle cell, but this kid does. So that's where that 25% chance comes from. Okay? Questions on sickle cell? Sickle cell. Okay? Down syndrome. Who's ever heard of Down syndrome? No?
Really?
So, Down syndrome occurs when something went wrong during meiosis, and that sex cell gained an extra chromosome. So, someone with Down syndrome has an extra chromosome. Down syndrome is typically called non-disjunct. Non-disjunct happens when a pair of chromosomes fails to separate during the egg or sperm formation. Okay, so that's what I was talking about during meiosis. When the egg unites with a normal sperm, or when a normal egg unites with a non-disjunct sperm, to form an embryo, the embryo ends up having 3 copies of chromosome 21. That's very specific. It's chromosome 21. There are other non-disjunct disorders that happen. A lot of them end up with miscarriages because the fetus just can't survive with that extra chromosome. But this one, the kid is born and will have Down syndrome. And of course, because your chromosomes are your DNA is in every single one of your cells, that extra chromosome is copied to every single cell in the person's body. Interestingly, non-disjunct events seem to occur more frequently in older women. So that's why they say, women over, I think it's 35 or 40, have a higher percent chance of having a baby born with Down syndrome. This may explain why the risk of having Down syndrome is greater among mothers age 35 and older. Okay? It doesn't mean that every kid born to someone over the age of 35 will have Downs. It just means that the percentage is much higher. Okay? And do you guys know the characteristics of Downs? Have you ever met someone with Downs? They're super cute.
The babies are so
They're so cute. They usually have... They have lots of interesting things. They have an extra, they have an extra joint in their pinky toe. So you know how your pinky toe only has 2? Their pinky toe has 3 joints. I think sometimes they're born with cleft palates. Do you know what a cleft palate is? It's so the roof of your mouth is called your palate. Cleft palate didn't form together, so there's a hole. It's a really distinct look that their faces have. It's a flatter forehead. I can picture them, I can't really describe them. I'll find you a picture later. But they have a very distinct look. You can probably look at someone and know they have Downs just by looking at their face. All right, and the last one we're going to look at is called Tay-Sachs disease. Tay-Sachs is a rare inherited disorder that progressively destroys nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. Tay-Sachs disease results in a deficit in the gene on chromosome 15, which codes for production of the enzyme Hex-A. So this is not a sex-linked disorder. So what kind of disorder is it? We talked about it in 2 slides ago. If you don't know, look back.
That one word.
That one word. Autosomal. Yes, autosomal. All right, so we all have 2 copies of this gene. Either both have Hex-A genes are activated, and the person produces enough enzyme to prevent the abnormal buildup of this lipid. Tay-Sachs carriers of Tay-Sachs are people who have only 1 copy of the inactive gene, along with 1 copy of the active gene, and are therefore healthy. They don't have Tay-Sachs, but they may pass on the faulty gene to their children. Okay, so what is this kind of telling you about the kind of gene the Tay-Sachs gene is? Is it dominant or is it recessive? Recessive. Why is it recessive?
Just as that chance that it gets passed on.
Okay, all genes get passed on.
Yeah, but never mind.
It's recessive because you need to have inherited from 2 different people.
Exactly. It's
Both
recessive.
genes.
Yeah, it's recessive because you need to inherit both genes. You have to have both genes for it to be expressed, right? It talks about the people who have the copy of the gene on one of their chromosomes but not on the other are still healthy, right? So the dominant gene is still being expressed. Carriers have a 50% chance of passing on their infected gene to their children. Children who inherit 1 inactive gene of Tay-Sachs are carriers like their parents. If both of their parents are carriers, the child inherits the defective Hex-A gene from each of them, and the child will have Tay-Sachs. When both parents are carriers of the Tay-Sachs gene, each child has a 25% chance of having Tay-Sachs and a 50% chance of being a carrier. And remember, that's that same Punnett square. Okay, so if mom and dad are both carriers, okay, so if both parents are carriers, right, you'll have 25% chance of not carrying and being healthy, 50% chance of carrying, and a 25% chance of having Tay-Sachs. Okay? Good. So there are a myriad of different genetic disorders that you can research, you can look up, and they're all incredibly interesting. We were going to do a brochure on them, but we just don't have time. So I'm going to give you the assignment for today. The assignment for today is 3 more Punnett squares questions. How old are you guys? Oh dear. Okay, so 3 more Punnett squares, but they're all sex-linked disorders or sex-linked genes. Oh my goodness.
Are we doing an assignment?
Yes.
What's the assignment?
I just told you.